Absolutely, go for it.
Okay.
I thought, okay, never mind.
What were you gonna think, Caitlin?
Yeah, go for it. Sure.
No,
Okay.
were you waiting for someone?
No.
All right. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to thank you for coming to tonight's program. Marilyn Buchenholz and I are co-chairs of the programming committee, and we are very excited about our program tonight. We have our Sisterhood member, Ellen Zaro Nissenbaum, who is going to present Sisterhood Night at the Museum, Claude Monet at the Crossroads. Now, many of you know Ellen, and Ellen wears many hats. And one of the things about Ellen that I'm sure a lot of you know, and that's why we have a great attendance tonight, is that she has been a guide at the Museum of Fine Arts for students and adults, but you may not know that she has been a guide there since 2002. She served as chair of the gallery instructors as guides for students and as a representative on the education committee of the Board of Trustees for the Museum of Fine Arts. Ellen has also been a participant and presenter at several conferences of the National Docent Symposium around the country. Currently, she serves as a digital tour guide to provide virtual tours for the MFA. At the conclusion of Ellen's remarks tonight, we will take questions, and please type your questions into the chat box and then Ellen will respond. We are thrilled to have you, Ellen, and why don't you start? Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to try to set this up. Hopefully I'll do this right. I think it works. So you all see my screen, Claude Monet at the Crossroads? Great, thank you and hello. I wish I could see you all, but I'm glad that you had me back to talk about art at the MFA. And I hope all is well with you all. I'm really pleased that you asked me to give you this intro to Monet at the exhibit, because you know I always love to talk about art and Monet is the perfect subject. The museum's thrilled that it's been able to open, and they've moved this exhibit to the contemporary wing where there's more space to social distance. I hope this is a good introduction for you, for those of you who might venture to the MFA to see the exhibit, or good for you who plan to stay home a bit. I've tried to blend a little of what you will see if you went to the MFA, and a little about art at the time of the Impression era. And I threw in a few extras about Monet himself. I included some images that are not from our museum, but use labels to point them out. The interest in Monet and some of his first paintings came from gifts from primarily 3 different families. Here you see one of them, Tom Perry, talking with Monet during one of the summers he and his wife visited the artist at his home in Giverny. Tom's wife, Lila, was an artist and collector and painted with Monet when she and her husband visited him multiple times over nearly a decade. Lila bought 2 of his paintings and brought them back to Boston with her and encouraged others to take a look at his work. So let's start with where this all began. In the 17th century, France wanted to become an art center in the world. An academy was organized to hold a juried exhibition of current work by renowned artists of the time. By the 19th century, these exhibits were referred to as salons, and hundreds of paintings were hung in multiple rows, multiple galleries throughout the exhibit halls. The show was managed by a state-sanctioned jury who identified the artists that were accepted into the salon and got the best viewing space. More than 1 million visitors would come to look and buy over a period of time in just 3 months. Here you can see the mass of people and paintings hung on the wall. And as a comparison, that's about how many people before COVID would come to our museum in an entire year. Paintings such as this one, The Death of Socrates by Jacques-Louis David, was held as an example of the finest and highest level of art. Genre paintings of mythology, religion, or major historical events were favored, as were the painting techniques of careful blending of brushstrokes, color, and maintaining distinct borderlines. The subject of these paintings were placed in the center of the canvas, shining in the light. The historical reference to Socrates allowed the painting to use scantily clothed figures to show off his painting techniques. David was considered among the finest of France's artists and was held as a standard. In a closer view, the central figure, Socrates, is giving his final treatise before he drinks a cup of hemlock. His disciples are already mourning his death. Socrates is presented as a young, able-bodied man in a typical Greek classical pose with his left arm and finger pointing to the heavens. And we know Socrates was not a young man at this time, according to the story. His students are spread across the picture plane against a gray background that allows the light to illuminate them. The fabric is elaborately folded and richly colored, and the light and shadow falls seamlessly across the floor. And seamlessly is the operative word here, because in reality, light wouldn't fall perfectly across any space in the natural world. The facial features are also distinct and beautifully rendered. Even in the background, you can see the detail of the building, each face and the folds of the clothing. Many artists studied with David, but emerging artists were growing restless with these established techniques. And by the time Monet was born in 1840, many of them didn't want to conform to the formal art world. Before this, artists would go to Rome to study, return home to reproduce the landscapes they saw in Rome, and then label it with French locations. And this is all beginning to change. On the left, you see a scene of the Barbizon forest, which is outside Paris. Artists such as Rousseau and later Monet would go to the forest and paint directly from nature. Others, such as Monet on the right, painted figures from everyday life, which elevated the importance of the common folk. He placed them centered on the canvas in great size and making them as the main subject, just like with Socrates in the earlier painting. Other artists pushed the envelope further. Here, Monet makes a political statement about the execution of Maximilian in Mexico by using abstraction. The final version's more detailed, but Monet's preliminary sketch blended the borders and colors without distinct faces. On the right, we see the picture of a young woman who becomes elevated in social status just because Monet chose to paint her at all. Her clothing, the guitar, and the background scene of a cafe indicate she's a singer, which was not considered a respectable career for a young woman. Unusual, Monet would paint her. The change to this new style was not immediate. You can see here, these two works were done only a year apart, but are very different in style. There are a few reasons why the look of art was beginning to change. In addition to the individual artist's preferences and interest in pushing the limits of traditional art, the innovation and use of the camera had a huge impact on canvas painting. Because someone with cameras could actually reproduce the world around them, artists and patrons were looking for something new to warrant the high price of purchasing a fine work of art. This picture on the left, in addition to the accurate details of a street in Paris, includes the first known photo of a person, which we see at our end of the street, low on the picture. These cameras are among the very first to replicate images onto paper. The other major innovation was paint in a tube. This allowed artists to go out into nature and paint what they saw directly onto the canvas. Before paint tubes, artists had to mix their own paint as they worked. The colored materials needed to be ground, mixed with a solvent, usually oil, and then applied quickly to the canvas before it dried in its container. It was often a daily and hourly routine. Artists could never have brought all their supplies with them to a location outside the studio. I thought that this would be a good comparison of two images from our own museum of a similar scene. Canaletto was a painter in 18th century Venice when it was a time of great commerce and international life. His depiction of the waterways focuses on the boats and the buildings. The colors are monochromatic and there is great detailing, showing a view similar to what you might get from a camera long before photography was available. In contrast, Monet's Grand Canal is full of color and all the lines are blurred. There'd be no need for him to present an authentic view of the Grand Canal since it could be photographed. While Canaletto gives us a picture of Venice as a busy, vibrant place by detailing the crowded buildings and the multiple boats, Monet suggests this through color and the squiggle brush strokes in the water and a hint of the boats you might be able to see there in the background. There's movement there. There's also the comparison of the wide angle view by Canaletto as compared to the up close enveloping view by Monet. Can't you imagine standing right there on that boat landing on the canal in Monet's work, perhaps even during dusk with the sun bouncing off the Baroque church? In the first painting, the view is most likely from a bridge or building high above the scene. Even the long pole sticking out of the water in Monet's work gives it a bit of realism. Most times you wouldn't get a perfect view of any scene. This was the goal of the Impressionists, to involve the observer in the scene and in the experience of looking. In this atmosphere, Monet and his fellow artists began to work outside. Although born in Paris, Monet's father moved the family to Le Havre in Normandy to run his grocery and ship chandlery business. Monet was having none of it, and encouraged by his mother and his aunt, he pursued an art career. He met Eugene Boudin during this time, who brought him outside to paint in the village of Le Havre. The two artists saw changes in society and drew those changes. People of all classes were coming out of doors to socialize, including women freer to mingle with men and other women. Here's a beach scene, a new social experience of the day. You can tell it's new, look the way they're dressed. Women seem to be having frequent fatigue illnesses, including fainting spells, for which the doctors recommended that they take take to the beach for a swim. However, in order to be socially appropriate, they needed to bring their beach clothes with them to a cabin that had been built on the beach. The cabin would then be dragged by horses to the water's edge, from which the women would emerge, and a young, strong man would carry her to the water. He would then dip with her into the water several times and bring her back to the cabin to reverse the process. That was swimming. Monet painted alongside his friend Boudin, developing his own unique style among the seacoast villages of Normandy. From the beginning of his career, Monet took a relatively traditional subject, but used a palette of contrasting colors, which was not at all traditional. You can see in this picture, he'd accomplished this through the effects of light here on the road, against the buildings on the right side, including the figures standing in the middle of the street, and the blue sky peeping out beyond the orange and yellow buildings. One of the most notable and moving paintings in the Monet exhibit is this piece, Ships in a Harbor. Done in Le Havre, this stunning work highlights the best features of Monet's talent. He's credited with his ability to paint water, not as a photograph, but in a way that shows how the water reflects the ships in this harbor. Looking closely at the water, we can see that Monet does not attempt to perfectly reproduce the reflection of the ships, but alludes to their movement. He did this with small, quick brushstrokes, little squiggles on a white-blue background. Monet was known for his quick strokes, but they were perfectly placed as he spent lots of time looking from his subject to the canvas while he painted. We can also look closely at the details of the ships and see the special care he took to paint the sails and the ropes that might not have been as distinctive when viewing further away. Even in the background, a building, probably a boathouse, can be seen. We're going back to the full painting just quickly before we move on because it's such a beautiful piece. And if you don't choose to go to the museum soon, you can see it here one more time or check it out on the MFA website. Monet soon returned to his place of birth, Paris, but was unhappy with the formalized training he was working on this piece, similar to the scene we just saw by Baudin, when he was encouraged to submit something to the Paris Salon. Not thinking he could finish this work on time, he switched to painting the woman in the green dress. This model is Camille Dancieux, whom he later married. Although he had begun this months before, he finished it in 4 days and submitted it to the Salon, where it received great acclaim. I've paired it with a later painting of Camille to highlight the change in Monet's work. This one is in our collection and is often on view. This time, he has dressed Camille in a Japanese kimono, as by the late 19th century, the French loved all things Japanese. Monet admired Japanese woodblock prints, and from that, he borrowed a more flattened look of Camille and the fans against the background. Camille owned the fan in her hand and those on the wall. She's wearing a blonde wig and lightened her face with powder. Many of the critics were harsh comparing La Japonaise to Women in the Green Dress. The critics didn't think that Monet had grown in his ability to render the face and details of the figure and did not appreciate the flattened plane. In 1874, the group of artists who were pushing the limits in French art made several submissions to the Salon. This one by Monet was rejected by the jury. He and his group decided to open their own salon, the Independents. Impression Sunrise drew great interest and offered the name to this new group of artists and their work. The critics, however, felt that this unfinished image was only worthy of being considered a sketch because the figures and boats were undetectable. Monet included this work in the Salon that he and his fellow painters organized the same year, which hosted more than 200 works and 4,000 visitors. When the critics asked how Monet would classify this painting, his response was, call it Impressionism. Monet rented a home in Argenteuil, a little village outside of Paris. Many of the Impressionists came here to paint in all seasons. Monet worked on the snow effects in a similar technique I'll point out again later in his grain stacks. The figures are distinct and undefined, and the perspective of the scene highlights Monet's emphasis in landscape rather than in figures. Notice the colors that dot both the snow, the foliage, and the fences, unlike the full blended brushstrokes of similar scenes by more traditional artists. His choice of colors is also not traditional white, but includes flecks of purple and red in unexpected places. Monet also tips his hat to the Japanese woodblock prints, which influenced so many of the Impressionists. While Monet adds much more color to his painting, he holds back on detail, allowing the viewer to complete the scene. For example, take a look at the trees on the right side of both works. They're incomplete, not fully formed or detailed in the trunks, limbs, and leaves, but Monet's work. Are you all there? I just got kicked out of the session.
No, we're still there. We can just see your
still
email.
here.
Yeah, but your
Now we see
PowerPoint
your
is,
email.
Okay.
there you
very
go,
good.
you're all set.
I don't know why my screen flipped, sorry. So anyway, on the right in the tree.
Also, Ellen, just one thing. I think somebody somehow annotated on the screen. It said, yeah, L. Miller. I don't know if it was that, but there was a blue circle and now a blue dot, which I know are not part of the image.
Oh,
So
that's right. They did annotate. So I don't know if I can get rid of that. Let me see if I can get erase.
Don't worry about it. Just
Should have said don't. Don't worry about it. You can't see it now.
There you go. Yeah, now it's gone.
Great. All right, let me see if I can get out of this now. All right, great. So anyway, on the right there, there's these trees and, but they're not fully formed. So when you look at them, you can see that all those little details aren't put in there. And that's very typical of the woodblock prints as well as Monet's work. So you still get the feeling of winter, snow, and all those huddled people who aren't really engaging with each other, much like our winters. Now something else isn't working. Let's see if I can do this. Good, I'll do it this way. So one of the other things from woodblock, excuse me, Japanese woodblock prints is adding in the effect of falling snow. So you can see it perhaps a little bit lightly here on the Japanese woodblock print, and definitely here in Monet's. Whereas the traditional painters used to paint a very clean, pristine view of the winter day, here we're more in the midst of a storm, because those traditional painters kept wanting to make these very clear, distinct lines. Monet didn't usually use figures in his work, but he did paint Camille, his wife. He had painted and planted gardens wherever he lived, and he often included Camille in the works. Here, the brush strokes are very short, very evident, and there's a stark contrast of the blue dresses against the red and pink flowers and the green foliage, which highlights Camille and the child. Monet used mostly pastels in these scenes of serene moments, but many times he was frustrated and depressed. Earlier in 1868, he was so despondent with his work, he tried to commit suicide by jumping in the Seine. He found that working on his canvases day after day, that the light and atmosphere would change, and he was unable to capture it all. He exclaimed that he would dream about the color changes in his sleep. However, later that year and into the winter of 1869, Monet produced magnificent studies of light and shadow, particularly in this winter scene. But again, he was frustrated because they weren't accepted into the salon. While in Argenteuil, Camille suffered ill health, especially with the pregnancy of her second child. It was here she died. And with Monet's despondency over Camille's death and ill health and their lack of funds, his family moved in with a friend, Alice Hodechet, whom, although she was still married, her husband, who moved to Belgium over bankruptcy troubles, took up with Monet after Camille's death. In time, Monet brought Alice, his 2 children, and her 6 children to Giverny, where he lived the rest of his life. Alice's husband eventually died, and she and Monet married. The landscape and light in Giverny brought Monet great satisfaction, and this was his most prolific time of work. Many artists and friends came to visit him there, sometimes to work, sometimes to visit. Monet painted what he saw, large poplar trees, broad meadows of poppies, and he painted these enormous spaces with these little short brush strokes, layer upon layer of paint, with contrasting colors of red against green, and with blue and purple skies and backgrounds, like the little mountains you can see, or hills you can see in the back on the left. This became a signature color palette and landscape structure for Monet. I love this work because you can so clearly see its treatment of use and color. Look at those long shadows of the trees. It gives you a sense of the time of day, and the colors tell you the season. You can almost feel that you're standing next to Monet. Monet often walked with his friends among the surrounding fields, pointing out the exceptional views that he saw and how the color and light created the magnificent visual he'd eventually put on canvas. Monet's series of paintings of the 1890s, which were multiple variations of a single motif, conceived, executed, and exhibited as a group, are among his most inventive and remarkable works. In the winter of 1892, Monet spent several months studying and painting the facade of the Rouen Cathedral in Normandy. From rooms facing the cathedral across a square, Monet concentrated on the analysis of light and the effects on the forms of the facade, changing from one canvas to another as the day progressed. Later, he took all these 30 paintings back to his studio in Giverny and worked on them there. The encrusted and impasto surfaces of dry, thickly layered paint evoked the rough texture of weathered stone, absorbing and reflecting light like the walls of the cathedral itself. There was an increased interest in Catholicism in France, so the public found the subject matter and the effect very attractive. And the pieces sold so well, Monet could return to Giverny and purchase the house and surrounding land he had been renting. These are great works to view both closely and from far away to experience Monet's working style. Earlier paintings of cathedrals and other buildings were done to focus on the details of the cathedrals in their one best day and primarily to copy them as photographs. Worked in this way, the building presented the same details whether at a distance or close up. In Monet's case, the closer view exposes the very colors and layers of paint Monet used to achieve his effect. From a further distance, the cathedral's outline and form comes to life. As he'd done in Le Havre with Impression Sunrise, Monet had a deep interest in the effects of light on water. In these scenes, Monet painted from a boat that he had retrofitted as a studio. It allowed him to capture these moments of haze on the water, but he had to rise at 3:30 in the morning to catch the first light of day on the Seine. Monet invited guests to join him on his studio boat and other artists to join him as he painted. Grain Stacks is also a series of works by Monet that shows the effect of light and season on the same subject with color. There was a field not far from Monet's house in Giverny where the farm had assembled grain stacks which sat throughout the year. After the harvest, the grain would be stacked. You can see the grain stacks in the distance there. Closer, we can see a farmer in the field and the stacks take on more shape. And with our noses almost pressed to the canvas, Monet's characteristic short strokes, variety of colors, and thick application of paint becomes visible. The stacks were often built up in the shape of small huts, and hay would be placed on top to protect the grain beneath it, therefore giving these bundles the incorrect name of haystacks. Later research showed that these were far more important than haystacks, hay being the food of animals and grain being the basis of wheat and flour for humans to eat. Therefore, all the names of all the paintings across the country and the world who had labeled them haystacks changed the labels on their paintings and on the walls. Monet was able to paint these throughout the season because all of them were harvested at the same time, but slowly used throughout the winter and spring. Like the Rouen Cathedral and the winter scenes in Argenteuil, Monet used quick strokes and infused his work with color to evoke either the warmth of the summer sun or the crisp cold air of winter. Monet's most famous works are those done at Giverny. Monet spared no expense to have his land transformed into a garden fashioned after the Japanese style. His most well-known admired works are the water lilies. Monet imported lilies from Egypt and South America and other flowers, trees, and shrubs to surround the lily pond, which he developed by diverting water from a local river. The town asked him not to use the foreign plant for fear of poisoning the water, but he did it anyway. He even went so far as to hire a gardener who dusted off the water lilies before he began to paint. Again, he pushed the envelope in his painting, this time by eliminating boundaries. Monet moved in close to the subject of his water lilies. With no horizon or edges of the pond, he again drew criticism for his choice of such a close view. Monet wanted only the lilies to be the subject of the picture with no distractions. Here, his outlines are a little more defined and colors more true than in some of his earlier work, but the lilies, their home, the water, and the reflection, they're the main subject. Sometimes it's no direction of light or indication of season. Water lilies are the center of attention. However, Monet did not have the same audience he had for the cathedral, and when Alice died, as well as his oldest son in 1911 and 1914 respectively, he became despondent once more. Monet was also suffering from a cataract in his right eye, and it was assumed that it affected his work. The lack of seeing ultraviolet caused him to bring more deep red in his paintings. Eventually, in 1923, Monet had the cataract surgery done. It was then that he decided to create a masterwork series of large-scale water lily canvases that would eventually be hung in lingerie in Paris, in an oval room that was built just for Monet's paintings. He also had to erect studio space to accommodate this practice. Today, I believe the closest place to Boston to view some of these works is at MoMA in New York City. I want to introduce you to Paul Durand-Ruel, who's so important in Monet's life. Durand-Ruel was a French art dealer associated with the Impressionists and the Barbizon School. He was the first buyer to support the Impressionists and is best known for his innovations in modernizing art markets. He changed the manner in which artists offered their work to the public, decentralizing the salon system. He's credited with promoting artists in his gallery shows by publishing a gallery show catalog, charging admission to the show, and hanging lesser-known works next to the more expensive ones in order to promote the newer artists. He also wrote articles and critiques of the shows to establish interest among the buyers. He was quick to offer works to galleries and gallery shows throughout Europe and the United States, including here in Boston. These promotional skills helped to compete with the salon-sponsored and controlled salon system to provide financial support for himself and the artists. Durand-Ruel purchased hundreds of works by the Impressionists, especially those of Monet. He spent his own personal money to publicize and promote their work and was often nearly bankrupt. He felt that these contemporary artists would influence art of the future. He sent many of Monet's works to Boston for the early gallery shows. His support kept many of the artists, including Monet, from destitution and allowed them to create their best work. This photo shows Durand-Ruel's son, George, visiting Monet as the gallery continued their support of him. This is a unique film of Monet painting in his garden. In the garden scene, Monet is fully dressed in a white suit with a dangling cigarette, which he smoked so often, he had constant yellow stains on his beard. He eventually died of lung cancer, although he was already 86. In this video, he stands at a 90-degree angle to the subject of his garden, the lily pond and high grasses to his right, so the canvas doesn't obstruct his view. He turns his head to the pond often in order to capture it accurately. And he changes the paint brushes and colors frequently and paints the grass in an upward motion at times, as though the grass is growing right out of the canvas. Hi there. The closeness of Monet's home to the garden allowed him to paint throughout the day and year, providing us with his most iconic work. Throughout his life, Monet struggled with finances, spending more than he had. He moved to beautiful locations and purchased only the finest materials. From time to time, he had to be supported by his friends, his aunt until her death, and his agent, who was always faithful. Monet was an approachable personality, although he could have fits of rage when he was frustrated with his own work. It is thought that throughout his lifetime, he destroyed more than 500 pieces of his own work. The impact of Monet's work is masterful, not only at the time he painted, but throughout much of the 20th century. He influenced Pollock's work on large canvases, Andy Warhol's repeating images, and Mark Rothko's work of color field. All are attributed to the influence of Monet. He fell out of favor with the public for a short time during the popular era of abstract expressionism and other art movements. But there was a resurgence in the 1950s. In fact, just over a year ago, one of his grain stack paintings that you see here sold for an unprecedented $110.7 million, the most of any impressionistic painting to that date. I also found moments of great compassion and loyalty in Monet. I was struck by the story of his relationship with his fellow artists and the unfortunate dissolution of the Impressionist group. Among their creative group were many writers and politicians, including Émile Zola. When Alfred Dreyfus was found guilty and imprisoned, Monet was the first to reach out to Zola after his writing of J'accuse. Monet had become an unofficial father of the Impressionist group and a very good friend of Zola. Others of this group, including Renoir, Degas, and Cézanne, were virulent anti-Semites even before the Dreyfus affair, but it had been overlooked until this incident in which all Frenchmen were taking sides. Monet was joined by Pissarro, of course, who was Jewish, Paul Signac, Mary Cassatt, Toulouse-Lautrec, and others, including George Clemenceau, who later became prime minister. It was a very difficult time in France, and one of Monet's biographers suggests that his seclusion in Giverny after this time was due in part to this incident. I hope this presentation's given you a little taste of Monet, and you'll come to the museum whenever you're ready and look at some of the Monets, because we always have some of them on view.
Ellen, have you
Yes.
finished the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, that was excellent. Let's see if we have some questions. I don't really see.
There are none. That's great.
There are none.
So I completed everything. What can I say?
I'll give a question for you, Ellen. So
Sure.
what was something that most struck you with in studying Monet and this exhibit that you felt so inspired by, or something that really touched you?
Well, what touches me about him is how much attention he paid to detail, how he would look at the same thing over and over again for days, all day long, and for days on end. And he wasn't trying to replicate something exactly. He just wanted to make sure he got the feel of the moment right. I was so impressed by that. I don't know if I've ever paid that much attention to anything. So I was impressed that that was important to him, and that I find inspirational.
Thank you. That was really.
In fact, when it comes to something like the Rouen Cathedral, most of the time I bring kids to the museum. I have them look up close and tell me what they see. And they see all these dots of purple and whatever else. And then I have them slowly back up. And as they back up, they begin to see the outline of the cathedral. And even if you go and do it, I mean, it's really nice. It gives you a really good effect. And then when you think about it, in order to do that, he has to stand pretty close to the canvas in order to get that on, and yet he wants that effect. And even though he isn't making it an exact replica, the proportions are right. Quite talented, quite amazing.
Until when is the exhibit open at the MFA?
I don't know if they have an end date right now. I should know that because it's been, everything's been delayed. It should have been down by now. So I don't know if they've determined that.
I have a question. It's
Uh-huh.
Cheryl.
Hi.
Hi, thanks so much. That was terrific. Are there any Monet paintings that have never been in Boston before?
That
Like
we've shown, or
in this exhibit, are there any new any paintings that have never been at the MFA before?
no, they're showing just the MFA works this time. They have done it in the past, a lot of times.
Right.
They brought things in. I think there might be, and I didn't go because I'm a little nervous about going to the museum, so I didn't go. There's a possibility, I don't know this for sure, there might be a couple of things from a private collection. We borrow from somebody, actually belongs to our temple from time to time, and I don't know if his things are there. But it doesn't say or show anywhere online or in the training that we got. And as I said, I didn't get there to check it out.
Ellen, thanks so much. I just wondered, where does the title come from? Maybe I missed it.
My title?
No, at the Crossroads.
Oh, my title, that's mine.
Oh.
Because he was between that French academic style and then became an inspiration for the 20th century artists. So he's sort of the pivotal figure between that tradition, that academy, French academy, and what came after him.
I love that. I love that you noticed that, because I noticed that as you were showing the images, and I was like, oh my gosh, you could tell from some of the images that the difference from the years.
From the years, yeah.
That was really impressive. Thank you.
So Ellen, it's Terry. Can you share a little bit about how you got interested in doing this? And you've been doing it a long time. And
well, when I dropped my son off to college, I realized I had to do something. And I thought I was going to go back to teaching. So I was kind of looking for work. And I saw, this is back when you used to find things in the newspaper. And I was looking there and I saw this little 1/2-inch ad in the whatever section it was in the tab. And they were having an orientation session for people who might want to be guides at the MFA. So I was a history major, but I was a double major. I was also a math major. So I had no time to take any art, but I loved art. I used to travel through museums everywhere I went. So I figured, sure, I'll go and try it. And I've been there ever since.
thank you.
Ellen, do you have a personal favorite on the
Of Monet's?
piece? Yes.
Not really. I like using the Rouen Cathedral the most. That's the one, actually, of a lot of the Impressionists, Monet is not necessarily my favorite. And I shouldn't say of the ones that we own. But of his, I like the Cathedral because I can use it so well. And I just think it really highlights his talent and what he went through in order to make these brilliant creations. I found in studying more about him that what separates him from some of the other Impressionists and why he almost became like a father image to them. And a lot of it had to do with his willingness to take on something new right away. There were other people like Monet, Degas, who preceded him just slightly, particularly Monet, but they didn't go quite as far as quickly as Monet did. And he also, you know, much like Rembrandt was in the same situation. They would settle for nothing less than the very best materials. They would travel to places in order to get the very best scenes, or go to places in order to see things, to study. And therefore, they were always broke. Rembrandt too, sold a lot, sold a tremendous amount, but they were always broke because they would not compromise. And I thought that made him very special.
Helen, have you been to Giverny or the Marmottan in Paris? And when we travel, can you tell us a little bit about your experiences, especially the Marmottan, which has got water lilies in that semicircular or the circular arrangement that you showed us at the L'Orangerie?
Well, it was, so my trip to Giverny was spectacular. I mean, you know, when I go places that I've studied, and I just like pinch myself, oh my God, I am here. This is amazing. And so that was my feeling. And the bus leaves you off. We took a train part way, and then you take a bus from the train station, and you walk up where you saw the little snow path. We had to walk up that little path to get to his house. And his house was much more spectacular than I thought it would be, much bigger. And, you know, he had these 8 kids that he had to put in there, and he had friends coming over all the time. And at the time, I don't know if you still can, we were able to walk over the little Japanese bridge. I mean, you're just there. It was amazing. The only down thing, I think, was the gift shop, because, you know, gift shops are never charming and quaint. So that was a downer. The unfortunate part of that, after having that wonderful day, is that we were there on 9/11. And we actually found out what happened on the bus back to the train station. So that was tough. And that was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So it had just happened. And the second tower, I think, was hit while we were on the bus. So that was tough. And, you know, it sort of clouds the day. Going to Lingerie was fabulous. I mean, it gives you this feeling of you're surrounded by these water lilies and you're, you know, totally entranced. I think, I can't remember where the other ones are. I know that I've been to the one at MoMA. I want to say the other one's in Chicago at the Art Institute, but I'm not positive. But there are others, you know, from the complete set along the way. And it is very encapsulating. And it is marvelous. And to think how large it is and how in proportion he's able to do this, you know. So again, you step back, you step close, you know, quite amazing. But you can see after going to his house out there, how he was so inspired. He was a busy guy, both personally and in his art.
Someone asked if, is it a legend that he was discovered in Boston?
What, a legend that
Monet was discovered in Boston? That was a question from
I'm
someone.
not quite. Well, there were 3 people in particular who loved this impressionist art, this new art. A lot of the Boston people, it's strange, even though it's considered such a parochial group of people, they seem to be very progressive in a lot of ways. And this was one of them. And in a lot of ways, I mean, the museum, our museum has a lot of things that other museums didn't have. And just because we had patrons that loved it. And one of it was the Impressionists. And they went out to meet Monet, to talk with him, to see his work, and purchase several of his pieces and donated them to the MFA. And there was one person in particular who was sent out to buy some art, other types of pieces. And he saw Monet's work and he took the money that he was given and he purchased Monet instead and brought it back to the museum. So they they just had this love for him and decided that they thought the MFA should own it. So we have quite a few of them. I think the Clark is the next closest museum that has such a wide variety of impressionistic art.
Someone else asked, who or what institution bought the record-breaking painting?
Oh, I don't know. I think it was private, because in all the research I did, now unless I missed something, I couldn't find the original owner or the person who purchased it. So it's most likely it was private.
Okay.
Ellen, somebody asked when the exhibit ends. It ends in February.
Oh, thank you.
And I was there last week. There are 40 paintings, some of which are borrowed from local owners.
From the owners.
Yeah.
That's what I thought it might be. Is it all the same one? The same guy? Did you notice?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay, because they often,
I think several people. Yeah.
several different people. I know there's one in particular, we borrow a lot from him. But thank you for the date. When you went, how was it there? Was it crowded? Did you feel?
No, it was extremely well organized, very safe. I felt extremely safe. Limited numbers of people, very well organized. Everything was touch-free. They wouldn't let you in until the person ahead of you left. It was an extremely positive experience.
Oh, good to know.
Yeah.
I know that when the tickets went on sale, well, not sale, but you had an opportunity to sign up for them for the next month, they went very quickly.
Apparently it's sold out till the beginning of January.
Right.
Oh.
They're releasing them slowly. And the morning that they opened, I think it was the 18th, was yesterday, was that they opened. People who tried to get on they had to wait an hour in order to purchase or sign up for tickets.
You're
A lot
cutting
of people want to go now.
You're cutting edge, Ellen. You're cutting
Pardon
edge.
me?
You're cutting edge. That we are cutting edge here. Like no one else
Right,
has said it,
it's
and
right.
got it here.
Right here at our fingertips. Definitely.
Thank you.
Ellen?
Oh, yes.
I have a question that may be out of the closeness to what we're talking about, but I often think about, I played Debussy when I was playing the piano and what have you, and studying and what have you, and love Englouti. Is just a magnificent piece, and I always felt that it went along with Monet. And I don't know if there is any kind of connection between particular impressionistic music and Monet's paintings. If I actually haven't researched it at all, so I'm asking from just my own thoughts and my own experience of playing the music and thinking about it and loving Monet. But maybe you know if there is some kind of connection or some kind of history of composers either writing for or with, or people adapting their thoughts around the connection.
Well, I know that during this period of time, there was a huge group of writers, artists, musicians, all types of people in the art who fed off of each other.
Yeah, I wonder.
And they, in fact, I read this wonderful book. I don't have it right here next to me, but it's called Dawn of the Belle Epoque. And it's a wonderful book. It talks about the history of the time, starts with the political, and how Paris came to be the center of the art world, you know, and all kinds of arts, and how these people came together, worked together, inspired each other. And reading it, it sounds like you're in their little world, and you realize how they married each other and then divorced and married somebody else. And it's sort of like this little group of, I don't know, well-known people who just, hobnobbed with each other, which I'm sure happens in every generation. But
Can
it
you
was
say the title again of the book? I'm sorry, Dawn of the what?
Belle, B-E-L-L-E,
Yeah.
Epoch. My French isn't very good. E-P-O-Q-U-E, Epoch, Epoch, Epoch.
Epoch.
Okay. My French is absolutely gone at this point, but nonetheless.
I got Belle. That's about all I could get.
Belle Epoque.
Belle Epoch. Okay.
Thank
And
you very much.
it's terrific.
O-Q-U-E.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So I think if you're interested in that, it'll really, you'll like it.
Thank you.
One of the things I didn't know when I was reading this about how separated Paris was, surrounded by walls up until, I think it was the early 19th century. And when, after Napoleon, people were angry with him and France, and there was sort of like an internal war, a civil war. Once the uprisings were squashed, eventually these walls were brought down and allowed Montmartre and these outlying areas to become part of Paris. And that's when all of this rich literature and intelligentsia sort of developed. They were finally beginning to hang out with each other. There wasn't the same status of the elite with the underclass. They were beginning to mix. You can actually see in the museum this beautiful painting by Renoir called The Dance at Bougival, of these two people dancing in the park. And you see by the clothing, there's a mixture of these different classes of people who are now hanging out together. And you see, women out in the park that never happened before, people smoking cigarettes outside they never did before. And Monet was part of this world, this changing, evolving world, like the 60s.
Well, Ellen, this was a wonderful program. Do we have any more questions? Charlene, do you have something you want to say?
Thank you. Thank you, my sister told me.
One thing I do want to mention, somebody told me, which is information if anyone, once we're free to go, that the Cleveland Art Museum has the large water lilies as well.
Oh.
If anyone has a chance to go there.
Okay. Ellen, I just wanted to mention, if you want to learn about the private lives of the Impressionists, you probably know of the book by Sue Rowe, and that goes into detail about a lot of the artists and their depression and their poverty, and also how they helped each other. They were often aware that one of the artists was, in real trouble, and they would come to that person's defense. So it's a summary, but it's very interesting. Sue Rowe, The Private Lives of the Impressionists.
There's also another good one called The Judgment of Paris by Ross King, and he also focuses on them. I mean, the way Monet met his second wife was there was a period of time where her husband, who had been a department store magnate, didn't have a lot of money, so he took her in with Camille. And then the other way, when he became despondent over Camille's ill health, she took him in. So they were back and forth. You're right. They were constantly helping each other out. So.
Well, Ellen, thank you so much. This was a fabulous presentation. And I think everyone really learned a lot about the exhibit. And you certainly put a lot of effort into it. And it really was a pleasure listening to you.
Well,
thanks.
thanks.
Yeah,
Thank
we
you.
really
I enjoyed it too. I learned a lot too. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Yeah,
Thanks,
you.
Ellen.
Bye.